It is historically absurd to claim a man discovered a civilization that already knew it was the richest place on earth. When history books tell us Vasco da Gama discovered India in 1498, they skip over the grim reality of what actually pushed him into the ocean. 15th century Europe was freezing and impoverished. Winter survival meant slaughtering livestock before snow fell, living off heavily salted, rotting slabs of meat for months. To make this decaying food edible, they desperately needed imported spices. Black pepper, cloves, and cinnamon were the magic ingredients that preserved their food and kept populations alive through the winter. Scientific curiosity had absolutely nothing to do with the age of exploration. The true catalyst was extreme continental starvation and the desperate need to keep food from spoiling. The geography posed a massive problem. Between Europe and the eastern spice markets stood a massive wall, the Ottoman Empire, blocking overland routes. Arab merchants monopolized remaining supply chains. A single sack of pepper passing through their hands to Europe demanded its weight in gold. Driven to the brink of bankruptcy by this economic stranglehold, King Manuel I of Portugal made a desperate decision. He funded a high-risk, nearly suicidal maritime venture to bypass the blockade entirely. He handed this mission to Vasco da Gama, a navigator chosen not for his sailing finesse, but for his violent, fanatical stubbornness. He was tasked with finding a back door to India through the deadly, unmapped ocean. With the land route tightly sealed, Portugal had to blindfold itself and jump into the Atlantic. The ocean was their only escape route. When da Gama's 4 ships departed Lisbon in July 1497, the crowds were weeping. They were watching a funeral procession for men who were fully expected to die at sea. Look at this historical nautical chart. Sailors navigated blind, guided by terrifying guesswork, fearing they'd drop off the world's edge. Sailing into that unknown was devastating. Scurving rotted their teeth, turning the lower decks into floating morgues of disease. The surviving crew eventually broke. They begged to turn back. Da Gama responded by drawing his sword, tossing their navigational tools into the sea, and threatening to murder anyone who tried to steer home. That brutal determination forced them blindly through waves the size of 10-story buildings at the southern tip of Africa, a geographical choke point known to slaughter entire fleets. Da Gama conquered the Atlantic. He didn't do it with superior European technology, but entirely on the back of his own terrifying madness. Once they finally rounded the African continent, the Portuguese were completely out of their depth. They docked in East Africa and had to rely entirely on a local navigator who actually understood the waters. This local guide possessed a sophisticated understanding of ocean currents and the stars. He used the powerful, seasonal monsoon winds to effortlessly push da Gama's broken fleet straight across the Indian Ocean. On May 20th, 1498, the exhausted, starving crew finally smelled rich sandalwood and pepper carrying over the waves. They had reached Calicut, on the western coast of India. The culture shock was immediate. Da Gama walked into the royal court, unwashed, wearing ragged clothes. He stood silently before the Zamorin of Calicut, a king dripping in thick gold chains and priceless diamonds. The great European explorer offered his diplomatic tribute, some cheap cloth, simple brass pots, and a few jars of honey. The Indian courtiers openly laughed at him. The men who claimed to be discovering a new world realized they were impoverished beggars, standing inside a civilization that already operated as the crown jewel of global trade. Following ancient Indian traditions of hospitality, the Zamorin treated the foreigners with dignity. He allowed da Gama to fill his holds with spices and sail back to Europe. This chart shows the staggering economic shockwave of that return trip. Accountants tallied the cost of the ships, the wages, and the dead crewmen. The spice cargo still yielded a pure profit of 64 times the initial investment. That unbelievable return on investment ignited a global gold rush. European monarchs saw the math and abandoned peaceful trade for outright greed. The Portuguese returned with cannons. The Dutch followed, then the French, and finally, the most methodical predators of all arrived. The British. Da Gama's maritime breakthrough was an invitation to violence. It handed Europe the blueprint for centuries of brutal imperialism and the systematic looting of an entire subcontinent. For hundreds of years, India's wealth was drained to build the modern cities of Europe. Gold, gems, and resources flowed out of the country in a one-way system of extraction that crippled the world's most prosperous economy. Looting a treasury is easier than erasing a civilization. Despite 300 years of direct foreign administration, the languages, local structures, and cultural systems of the subcontinent survived the colonial machinery. This persistence fueled a century of organized resistance, from armed revolts to mass nonviolence, leading to the moment on August 15, 1947, when the colonial flag was finally lowered for good. The empires eventually collapsed. The galleons rotted away. The nation remained. Vasco da Gama mapped a passage for ships, but he found a nation that had already spent millennia defining itself. History eventually corrected his map. The empires are gone, but the destination remains.